Lord Jesus, thank you that you are King. Thank you that you have, as a king, defeated all kings, as a ruler, defeated all rulers, and you did so by laying down. You did so by putting your crown aside.
Thank you, Lord.
And for that we are very thankful.
Amen.
Meet with us today. Open your word to us. Open us to your word. So let me be honest with you for a minute. It's hard for me to know how to approach a sermon about the military. This is a very, very hot topic and has a lot of sides to it. I have friends who I love and respect on all sides of it as well. I have friends who are in the military right now, who did a few tours in Afghanistan and Iraq and served bravely. I have friends who are ardent pacifists, extremely smart and realistic and brave people who would rather die than take up arms against another person. It takes real strength to be a pacifist. Don't ever think otherwise.
Amen.
Yes.
Growing up on the East Coast, in the church atmosphere, the military was everywhere. As sure as you might see a cross everywhere, because I was in the South, you'd see an American flag everywhere, at the front of every church and every classroom. I was taught that America was basically God's country, and that He was behind all of our military endeavors and leaders. And to criticize military or leaders or anything else was to commit blasphemy indirectly. And they voted for the Bush family, Ollie North, and John McCain as a matter of course. Then I went to school in the Pacific Northwest in Canada. And here the game changed entirely. Almost everybody I knew was a pacifist. And many felt called by God to join in protests and stage demonstrations and burn their draft cards. Government, especially American government, was criticized all the time, even in sermons. It was very, very common, especially because the war in the Middle East at the time, which they referred to as Mr. Bush's illegal war, was starting to heat up. And they voted for Obama, Bernie Sanders, and Ralph Nader, as a matter of course. What was a kid in his mid-20s supposed to do? I was so confused. The patent truths and foregone conclusions I had lived with my whole life were being questioned. And I felt like the walls were caving in on me politically, along with the walls already falling down in that part of your life. Now, that's when you think a lot of walls are falling down. They really fall down like 10 years later, but at the time, I was living in a part of North America that is arguably the most critical of the United States, and I had moved there from a part of North America that is arguably the most uncritical of the United States. It was an interesting sandwich to be in. So here I am, in the middle now of these two coasts, and in the middle of these two ideas, feeling led to give you a sermon on Veterans Day. I will post this online, and I will have my lefty friends from the West Coast appalled that I would give a sermon on Veterans Day. If I didn't, my righty friends from the East Coast would be appalled. So, there we go. To my pastor friends in the Northwest, this is much like a typical Sunday where they will try not to say anything political today, probably. And to my pastor friends in the Southeast, the flags will be flying and the national anthem will be among the worship songs. I have understanding and respect for people of both journeys.
Amen.
But first today, I want to talk about Jesus. First of all, to talk about Him, not use His pulpit as a place to criticize my government or a place to uncritically praise my government.
Amen.
It's His government. Our older brother, the Apostle Paul, told us to pray for our leaders, not to worship them. And today I want to look at our soldiers in Scripture. I want to look at those in uniform who the Lord and others in the early Christian community interacted with regularly. It is no argument that Jesus has a special place in His heart for children. So many times we see Him advocating for them and welcoming them as they crawl all over Him and make a mess of things. You don't sort of welcome a child into the room. You just do. I believe also today that Jesus had a special place in His heart for soldiers. Let me immediately qualify that. Because He had a special place in His heart for them did not mean that He automatically supported the government behind them. Actually, the soldiers we see Him interact with are Roman, and He had no support for the Roman government. They were oppressing Israel. Yet in the intimate interactions we see He had with soldiers, He He has a special heart for them personally. And in the end, I think that's what Veterans Day is all about. I don't think Veterans Day is a political day at all. Quite the opposite. Veterans Day is about thanking those who served, gave part of their lives, sometimes all of their lives, in order to protect us.
Amen.
These are real-life people who, especially in the heat of battle, were not thinking about chattering politicians in Washington. They were thinking about people back home. Other real-life people. And they acted in the best way they knew how to bring some peace to a broken world. And we don't have to all be on the same page politically to honor everyone who's a veteran. We don't have to vote the same way to agree that the courage, bravery, and honor of soldiering is a place where God shows up. Jesus respected and interacted with all people on their level, in some ways especially with soldiers. And that soldier personality, tough, resilient, the submissive leader, ended up being extremely important in the story of the gospel. I think there are two important conclusions that I will put out before we start a discussion on what it means to be a soldier. First of all, we are not Republicans or Democrats. We are not Americans or anything else. We are Christians. We belong to God first of all.
Yes. Amen.
The kingdom is the first one you are subject to, and that alliance outrides all other allegiances.
Amen.
That is not optional.
Yes.
As soon as you see the government or institution or community that goes outside of God's kingdom ways, and you bow the knee to your Lord. You are Christ before you are anyone's.
Amen.
A second conclusion I also believe to be very important. Now, as a kid, like any other American kid, I played with my G.I. Joes and my little toy plastic guns. And one of the strongest statements, I remember my dad saying to me, it actually scared the crap out of me. I was young. I was 5 or 6. And my dad, who is a proud veteran and served veterans all through his career in Virginia, said, "Josh, war is hell. War is hell. War is hell. There is nothing beautiful or joyful about it. Anyone who has been in the middle of it will tell you just that. I can't wait for this to be over. I can't wait for this to stop. War is not a good thing. Military service is one of the most honorable things you can do. But war itself, violence and death, was not God's plan for how the world was supposed to be. We bear arms with the hope that one day we will lay them down forever. One day our swords will finally be beaten into plowshares when the kingdom finally comes into its own. But now we live in the time between the times. We live in a broken world in which broken people are fighting over diminishing resources in broken ways. And it will be that way until the end. So let's look at a specific interaction from the Gospels today. Jesus' longest conversation with a soldier. Matthew 8, 5 through 13. Matthew 8, 5 through 13. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be clean and healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from the east and the west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And to the centurion Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. Now this is the longest conversation we have between Jesus and a soldier. He was a centurion. He was middle management for the Roman government. He was over 100 soldiers, centurion. The Romans ruled over Israel at the time, and he was over a certain territory. Luke and Matthew both tell this story. Luke tells us that this man had paid for the Jewish temple with his own money, and that the Jewish leaders were begging Jesus to do whatever he asked. I spoke on the Luke passage last year at one point, and the conclusion I came to about this man was this. He was not a great man, this centurion. He was not an evil man. He was a good man. He was a good man who loved his employees dearly, was kind toward people he was meant to rule. What we have in him is a mixed bag of good intentions, understandable screw-ups, and dueling loyalties. A lot like I think we have to bear that in mind as we think of veterans as well. One of the great burdens of what they had to do was belong body and soul to a larger institution. Most of us don't know what that's like, at least not in the way a veteran does. They had to go with the best they knew at the hands of people they'd never met, making decisions in places they'd never been. This man is part of such a system in this way, and he chose in his immediate sphere of influence to be merciful and loving. He was on the cusp, as we might say. The centurion was one of very few occupations where he could move his way up the social scale. He could go from being a lower middle class nobody to part of the knighted class by the time he retired. He was the kid out of the hood who got some college and made something of himself. He was the kid from the trailer park who joined the army so he could climb the pole. And yet his goodness comes through even in this place where he should be thinking about his own career and his own self. He cares for the people that work for him. He even helps out locals in their faith, which he did not share. And here he comes to Jesus. Here he comes to Jesus. In verse 6, when he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." Now it's important, if you boil down that verse 7 in the Greek, it is better translated, "Shall I come and heal him?" Shall I? Me? In just a few words, there's tons going on here. A Roman person would never come to a foreigner, especially one they were meant to rule, to ask him for something. Never. He might come to you and tell you what you're going to do. Carry my armor was a very common thing. They just walk up to you, hand you their armor, and say, "All right, let's go." Common command. He would never come and ask you for anything. One painful part of American history that's similar to this is that just a few generations ago, any white person could walk up to a black person and say, "Hey boy, help me with my luggage up the stairs, I'll give you a quarter." Anybody, you didn't have to know that person. Abner remembers this. We've talked about it. And that was something that people could do. It's that kind of oppressive arrangement we're talking about here. That's what's going on. A Roman soldier would never ask you for anything. He told you what you were going to do, and he didn't have to be nice. That man kind of tries to pull that here in this moment. If you look here, he doesn't really ask Jesus for anything. He just tells him what's going on. And he says, "My servant is sick. My servant is at home, and he's sick." And Jesus' very subtle answer is often lost in translation. What Jesus says is, "Shall I come and heal him?" And the move here is a huge statement. He is making him ask. He is making him ask him for something. The centurion is well within his rights to just run a spear through Jesus at this point. It's very embarrassing for him to do that. He's basically saying to him, "You have to ask me." And the soldier does so. But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed." And here we have a soldier being just that, a soldier. He recognizes royalty when he sees it. He recognizes power when he sees it. This is that soldier instinct that Jesus commends. I've worked with a lot of military chaplains in my chaplaincy days. One of them continues to be a close friend. And I was always impressed with these guys and the bravery and endurance they showed. You could have a military chaplain in a room with mentally ill patients screaming at him and trying to hit him, and he would just be like this. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Screaming, crying family members, and they would be steady Eddie. Endurance. That's that soldier instinct. Among military chaplains, they have a saying. The mark of a true chaplain is that your troops know your voice in the dark. And I heard that, and I became a chaplain for 6 years. That meant a lot to me. And that's the real deal, and that's what Veterans Day is about. And we have to look here at who this centurion is asking for. His servant he mentions multiple times. A centurion was not allowed to have a family while he was serving. It had been 20 years. And this man had essentially given up his youth to his country, which is what many people do in service today. He was not allowed to have a family, so his servants were his family. And the slave he's talking about was the only family he had. And in this case, the soldier was driven by something greater than his ethnicity, than his political status, and his wealth. He was driven by love. Amen. Don't lose the visual here. An incredibly powerful person. A soldier bowing the knee to a peasant from an ethnic and religious minority. He's bowing here to another one of their messiahs. Jewish messiahs came and go. They were all over the place. They came and went every other week. There was another one. And they made the centurion's job very hard because they whipped up the locals. And yet here the soldier is the one who bows the knee. It took a soldier. It took someone who knew what it was like to live for something greater than himself, to humble himself for something better and greater. The mark of the true chaplain is that your troops know your voice in the dark. He was probably putting his reputation, perhaps his life, on the line to ask Jesus for something. And in that sense, because of that, Jesus opened the real truth to him more directly than he had to anyone. Very, very, very important exchange. It's interesting here that the soldier was used to interacting with forces and powers bigger than himself as the one to recognize finally what was going on. But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me."